Hello, this is 13 with Superior Mobile by 13, and today you're going to watch the insanity that is a backyard project of a footer pour for a freestanding concrete block wall. So what you're watching right now is just some of the pregame that we had done that morning, where Danielle removed all of those plants that were going to be in the way, and I built a chute out of some plywood, some 2x4s, and some plastic sheeting. And now I'm building a platform out of some cinder blocks and some plywood, and that way we can actually work at a reasonable height rather than lifting concrete bags over our head. And this is going to be the first batch that we've done. You can see my friend Teng has arrived now, and we're following the directions of the mixer, which was basically to add in half the water, all of the concrete, and then the other half of the water. And then when my buddy Alex here had arrived, it was a big old lump inside that thing, and those instructions are terrible. Never mix concrete in a mixer that way. It just doesn't work. We eventually got that clump broken up and mixed in and then dumped out. And so the second batch was really where we figured out the appropriate technique of Alex adding every bag of concrete while I was spraying water in there simultaneously, and that way I could make sure that I maintained an appropriate consistency of the mix. Now, I didn't measure slump or anything like that. Basically, all I was going for was something that wasn't quite flowable, so I didn't want it too wet, but I also needed it at least wet enough that we could work it down the chute and I could spread it out evenly. So it's just kind of a balancing act, and honestly, I just based that on my previous experience with concrete work. And this mixer was rented from Home Depot for about $150 for a 24-hour rental, so it ended up being very cost-effective for this kind of project. I rented the mixer the night before, that way I wouldn't have to worry about it first thing in the morning and we could just get to work. There are several pallets worth of 60-pound concrete bags just out of frame, and I had those delivered the week before, again from Home Depot. It was about $80, and they forklifted all of those pallets of very heavy material all the way into the backyard and staged it maybe 20 feet away from our job site, so that was money well spent. So you're looking at the process here. This mixer was rated to handle 20 bags at a time, but we found that it worked best when we were loading 19 60-pound bags at a time into this thing, again, while adding water in order to keep that consistency right. And when the mix looked right, we could just flip the thing over, it would dump out into the chute, and the chute would just spill out into the formwork, and at that point I'd be using a hoe or a shovel to spread out the material and get it where I wanted it. So this is just the approach that I took towards solving the footer pour problem, but if I had more money and if I didn't have such amazing friends, what I would have done was get a ready-mix concrete truck that would have been parked out in the easement in our front yard, and then I would have hired a dude who would come out with a concrete pump and would have paid him, and he would have run a bit over 200 feet of hose from the front easement all the way into this backyard location, and he could have just pointed that hose into location and the concrete would flow forth super easily, and then I would have been dedicated to just floating and finishing the concrete itself, and all of the actual mixing and transportation of the wet concrete would have been done mechanically and not required human intervention. And that sounds really sweet on paper, but it would have been significantly more money than this approach. Alternatively, we could have rented the ready-mix truck and then done wheelbarrow transportation, which would have eliminated the cost and the mess of the pump. And I calculated that to be somewhere around 50 plus wheelbarrow trips, and it would have been around our side yard, which is both sloped and sandy, which means extremely dangerous, difficult terrain to navigate, and also we'd be going across our brand new driveway. So I just chose this as the path of least resistance. Another notable downside to this approach is the amount of waste produced. So you can see by now that there is a pile of trash that is accumulating, and ultimately by the end of this project it was only 3 trash cans worth of trash, which really isn't that much, but at the same time a ready-mix truck would essentially have 0 waste. This was a lot of work, no question about it. There's 3 young strapping gentlemen here working our hearts out. It took us a grand total of 5 hours and 15 minutes from the first bag ripped open to the end of this video. In that time we managed to mix just under 260 60-pound bags of concrete. So an absolutely amazing task, and I could not have done it without the dedicated help of my 2 amazing friends, Aleks and Teng. Thank you so much, guys, for your help and assistance with this project. I'm so grateful that I have friends that are still crazy enough to answer the phone when I call them for help. Also, of course, a big shout out to Danielle for playing an amazing supporty spice throughout this entire adventure, but boy did we crush it, get dirty, and have some fun.